Hello, everybody. As you can see, we did a little bit more updating of our intro and the stop motion. And I confess that took me since like August, and like 6 hours equals like all of 9 seconds or something. So, yes, that was a lot of work, but we got everybody in there, and I'm so excited. I did notice a comment Davey actually pointed out. There is a comment that Leanne made that is absolutely true for this evening. Davey, you want to pull it up?
First off, let's give Brandy a virtual round of applause, please, because that was incredible. Believe me, that is all Brandy. I just add the music to it. That is all her. So a wonderful, wonderful new open for us. I love it. All the characters in there.
Yeah,
our peculiar family grows and grows.
It does. I'm ready to longer slide or a longer song.
There we go. Love the intro. Clap, clap, clap. Thank you, everybody. Yes, Rebecca, Leanne's comment.
Yes,
Brandy will have invisible hair tonight. Where'd it go?
Like, invisible. That's right.
Clearly, nano refractive technology.
Yeah, like it's really there, but you guys can't see it because I've got a cloaking device over the hair right now, right? So it's really long, actually. It's
for our
you can't see it so long.
I guess we should let our podcast listeners in on the secret too.
Brandy is currently bald from chemotherapy work, actually. It's okay, though. I'm going to be just fine. I've got one more to go, and all will be smooth sailing. And then I get to have like super cute peach fuzz hair, like one of Davey's babies.
Yeah, it slowly grows back. We'll see who grows their hair out faster, you or the baby.
Yeah, I know, right? But it's really good to be here tonight. There's going to be so many invisibility jokes. I can't even get to it. But I would like, without further ado, I should say, to introduce the currently invisible author. We're going to make him visible just for you guys. Ta-da! That was well done, Greg. Welcome aboard.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Yes. So this was a fun book, and we're going to talk about this. There's so many fun puns and everything, partly because, invisibility just seems like something that shouldn't be attainable, and yet there's weird ways in which we have already achieved it. I think we need to address the elephant the elephant is in the room right now. You just can't see it. It's invisible. It's complicated. Looks like we have a whole crew here tonight. I'm so excited. So Ryan said several people seem to be battening down their hatches for southern snow. And some of the people in the colder climates don't have much snow. I think Jennifer Pierce, I saw earlier, you saying that it's just now starting to snow. And Rebecca is on a boil water warning for some reason. So we're all having some challenges this evening. So I'm just glad we can be here together, learning new things.
All right. Oh, did Brandy freeze? Are we having more?
Sorry, I froze a little bit. I'm back.
Even more challenges.
Even more challenges, but it wasn't a water boil order. Okay, so I do have some questions are already coming in. Oh my gosh. But we'll start off with the softball question. While everybody else get your questions in, we're going to populate them as we go. But I always begin by asking, what gave you the idea to write this book? And then after you have a chance to kind of flesh that out, I promise we'll go to the exciting new announcements.
Fair enough. Actually, because I did my PhD work on invisibility related stuff.
Interesting.
When I started working for a theoretical optics person, Emil Wolf, in around 1996, that was sort of the first project he tasked me with, was studying something he'd been interested in for a while, so-called non-radiating sources, which are sources of radiation that don't radiate, and it's connected to invisibility. And so at first I was a little worried about my career, because I'm like, nobody actually cares about this stuff. But it turned out to be really fascinating. And it also turned out, for a few glorious years, I was the leading expert on the physics of invisibility because nobody else cared. And then there were these big cloaking.
That happens to a lot of people on the Peculiar Book Club, I just want to say.
Isn't it the blue water theory, right? Don't swim where the water's red, where everybody else is. Swim where it's blue, where there are.
There you go.
Yeah,
it's
that makes
business terms. Yeah.
Sharon says she loves the idea of Doctor of Invisibility. That's just a good thing right there. Rebecca Gibson says, me, happened to me. Yes. Most of us here, I think, end up being in charge of really niche areas and becoming kind of expert at that. But well, I like that because, of course, it's a situation where I think science fiction gives us an edge because of course we already believe in science fiction. Most of us don't think that it can happen in actual science. And so when you say that you have a like Doctor of Invisibility, it's like your Doc Ock on Spider-Man. Everybody's like, what? How? Where? Is he a supervillain? So it must start some interesting cocktail reception conversations.
Oh yeah, and I've heard I in some sense I've heard it all in terms of jokes and comments and questions. And I remember being on another podcast and I ended it in a way I probably shouldn't have, that the host kind of joked, well, you might be taking over the world with all this invisibility stuff. And I said, yeah, that might be, but I'm also incredibly lazy. So,
Oh, well, yes. So we're all fairly safe. So Peculiars, he just said he's heard it all, but I bet you'll come up with things he's not heard before. This usually happens. Oh, and Amanda Johnson's with us now too. She said there's no snow in Ogden. So it's very strange. Climate change has changed where we find all kinds of stuff, I have to say. So before we get going, I have 3 questions already queued up. You guys can continue asking away and I will get to them. But let's do some announcements. Davey, if you want to roll back in and take us through, we have some new stuff going on.
Yes,
and
we
your party,
do.
in fact. All right. First of all, yes, you can find us on social. We're kind of everywhere. We've traded Twitter for Blue Sky. So if you're a Blue Sky person, please go there. And we are all over that. Still on Instagram, Facebook, and also Facebook groups, Discord, Goodreads, all kinds of stuff. You can find us, and that stuff's on the website, which is currently being revamped to be even more user-friendly. Thank God. So that's coming along soon too. But next, we have some new things, and I want you guys to just take a moment with me because I feel like we've grown so much that not everybody realizes all the things that we're doing right now. So first of all, if you're here tonight, you know we're on YouTube because that's where we're at. And you can watch us on YouTube. However, you might be listening to us on the podcast. Our podcast audience keeps growing, but not only that, we've added new things. So we have a little surprise. Last year, we added Davey's film, movies, Peculiar at the Movies, which has been a huge hit and fascinating. I think we're doing, what's the next one we're doing?
We'll get to that in a second.
Okay, we'll get to that. And I've also added the mystery podcast. So we are now also going to be separate because most of our books on the show are nonfiction, but we like mystery. I've decided to add a mystery podcast. Deanna Rayburn, Chuck Wendig are going to be guests. There will be new guests rolled out all the time. So you should definitely listen to the podcast. And there's also shows there that don't appear on the video, including Carl Zimmer, who will be coming up in February for his new book, Airborne. If you're reading with us, Goodreads, but also book club, our bookclub.com.org, I think it is, helps you keep track of the meetings in a little bit the same way that Facebook does. Send you reminders, adds things to your calendar. Super helpful. Goodreads, you can get all of our books past, present, and future, which will help you see where we're going next and what we're reading. And of course, you can join our Facebook group to participate. But of course, in the center there, Patreon. We've moved everything to Patreon for support, and it's really, really useful. If you want to become a VIP, that gets you all the extra shows. I think it's the next slide, actually. Am I wrong? Hope I'm right. Oh, nope, that's the newsletter. Well, you should do that too. The newsletter is also great. But support us on Patreon. It does help us run the show. But in addition to supporting us, it gets you extra stuff as well.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and we all love bonus things.
We like bonus things. Newsletter for links. Please do. The newsletter is mostly where we send things out. We will try to put them on Facebook when we can. Doesn't always happen as quickly. So the newsletter is still where it's at.
Jennifer says, I will be launching a Peculiar Book Club on Storygraph shortly.
Right. We're going to be everywhere, basically. You won't be able to get away from us at all.
There it is.
Oh, here it is. So for Peculiar membership, I feel like a car salesman, but for as little as $5 a month, you can get all VIP shows. That is really a great thing because you can join anytime. Once upon a time, we only did annual subscriptions. Now our annual subscriptions do have you do get a discount, but you can join at any point in the year. You can join for as little as $5. Higher levels get other stuff. You can go backstage with authors. You can get cool swag, see different content, and the VIPs get to recommend books for the next year, which is always really exciting too.
All right. How about that cocktail?
This was amazing. Can we like zoom in on this picture?
You know, I thought you might say something like that, which is why I added this extra slide.
Look at this picture. Kat does these. Kat, she's our drinks maven, and I don't understand how she made the invisible glass, but somehow there's like a halo. It's the most impressive thing I've ever seen. And it tastes really good. So sorry, back to the name. Peculiars got to vote on the name, and I believe we went with
the obscure
for what ails you. This is your cocktail, Greg. It's for you. It's got sparkling wine and ouzo, lemon juice, honey thyme syrup. It's really, really refreshing. Everyone who's tried it has said it is amazing. So that's the invisible glass for the cocktail for this evening.
And of course, you can always check out the recipes in the newsletter and on the Facebook group. You don't have to copy them down here.
Yeah, you don't have to copy them down here. You could.
All right. So speaking of that podcast feed, yes, the Peculiar Movie Club. We finally, me and my podcast partner Darren, finally recorded our December episode about 3 days ago. And so it's out now. A lot of you seems like you've already listened, but Interview with a Vampire, it was in honor of the book Bite from December, and it was a very bitey movie. You were not wrong. It is also a very moody movie. Like,
it is a moody movie.
You gotta be in the right mood for that.
It's like emo vampires.
Yeah. Yeah. And emo New Orleans French vampires. Anyways,
yeah.
So that's what we did for the book Bite. For your book, Greg, of course, there were a lot of choices, but there was really one choice. So we went with the more modern take, but the Invisible Man remake, which came out in 2020, I'm hearing only great things. I think it was up to like a 91% on Rotten Tomatoes. So could we have gone back and watched the 1930s Invisible Man? Probably, but I figured this will be interesting and easier for people to find. And
probably.
Yeah. So I'm just going to say it's going to be our January episode. I'm not going to put any guarantees on when exactly the episode will come out. But what I do want to challenge you is, if you are a podcast listener, leave a rating and review. We haven't seen a lot of ratings and reviews pop up on there, and it helps the show grow. It helps other people find it. So that way, if they just search book club, we pop up. So if you are a podcast listener, please leave a rating and a review, whether it's for this or for the Peculiar Movie Club or whatever you want to say. So we appreciate it.
Very nice. And I also just want to add, we have one other secret surprise for you podcast listeners and for the live viewers. And that is, Greg has very kindly offered signed books. And so when we get to the Davy quiz, the all-important Davy quiz, those who are the most correct answer, first most correct answers live will win a signed book. And the first of our podcast listeners to email peculiar@bsquillace.com will also receive a signed book. So we're making sure that everybody gets a chance to win with us here, which is, well, I mean, it's not what it's all about, but it certainly helps, right?
Sorry, Greg, you joined the first episode of the year. You get the long announcement.
Sorry.
It's just how it is to kick off the year.
I'm willing to accept that. That's fine.
Okay. Well, I have lots of questions lined up for you, so we're going to dive in now. The first one is from Leanne, and she says, you like to study the physics of falling cats, which is also true about you. And I actually didn't learn that until later. But what can we learn from falling cats, Greg?
Yeah, a lot, it turns out. That was my first nonfiction popular science book, was Falling Felines and Fundamental Physics, which is about how there's this sort of 300-year history of people studying how cats land on their feet. And it's touched on so many areas of science and technology, all the way up to the present day. And just to give a little bit of an overview, like early on, people were just very interested in how things move when the laws of physics were still kind of being formulated in the 1800s and really figured out. People were trying to understand conservation laws, like conservation of angular momentum. And could something like a cat just spontaneously flip over while it's in free fall. Turns out they can, but people didn't think they could. So we learned a lot just from the first videos of cats flipping over, because there were literally scientists who saw the first photographs of a cat flipping over and said in a scientific meeting, what you have presented goes against what the basic fundamental laws of physics as we know them, which is so perfect for a cat.
It is so perfect for a cat who also exists in liquid form.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's actually one of the arguments I make about what they got wrong, is that those people who said cats can't possibly flip over, they were basing their intuition on rigid body motion and rotation. And cats are pretty much the opposite of that.
Yeah.
But then just to give a very short overview, because this is on invisibility. Oh, go ahead.
Plus, I hear that all early physicists were dog people, right? That's just
a lot of them. Yeah.
Yeah. A dog does exactly what you think it will do.
It will fall.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like
exactly.
Liquid cat.
Yeah. And there was Edwin Hubble, apparently, was one of the astronomers who ended up with a cat later in life that was a constant companion. But other things, like in the 1920s, people were interested in physiology and basically how do living beings stay on their feet with reflex motions. They realized that studying how a cat can flip over was a good way to understand further how our reflexes work. And
mine
then
don't,
in the fifth,
largely. Mine don't.
Yeah.
Like I don't stay on my feet very often, actually. Like it's better if I'm just, seated a lot of the time.
Yeah, and it's also true of cats. I often say, because they have very good skills and are constantly pushing the boundary past them. I like to say that cats are smarter than we think, but far less smart than they think.
Oh, well, yes, that jives with me, actually. That makes good sense. I have 2 cats. I feel like I see this play out daily.
Yep.
Well, I have another question for you. This is from Anthro Girl. She says, how did no one care about the physics of invisibility? Isn't invisibility one of those things that the government military have been working on forever? Like, how?
Yeah, and that's sort of a yes and no answer, because yeah, we've always been interested in trying to make things more difficult to see, like radar. And in fact, the metamaterials that people discovered to make invisible objects in the 2000s, people back in World War II were trying to invent them without that name to try and hide things from radar. Right. So to some extent, people have always been interested in sort of limited forms of invisibility, being able to hide under specific circumstances. But also, there was a lot of belief that it was just not physically possible to make something that could be really invisible invisible. Like it's standing right there and you can't see it. Like people figured any sort of invisibility would be limited. So I would say that the studies of them also ended up being a bit limited in that sense.
Well, yeah, I guess if you don't think that it's going to be, I mean, I want a cloaking device. I think that would be a brilliant idea, actually. That just seems like awesome. But at the same time, if I hadn't known about your book, I probably would still think it was the realm of science fiction. So I kind of see where people are like, don't, because you have to get funding for things, right? You're going to, hey, give me some money. I want to study turning things invisible. And they're just going to go, no.
Yep. Yeah. And there's sort of an interesting lesson, because my PhD advisor was one of the people who had published a paper saying that it looked like perfect invisibility was not possible. And the lesson for a lot of physicists, including me, is that we didn't really read the fine print, because the fine print was, Emil Wolf said, invisibility is not possible for a broad range of materials that includes almost everything we can see in nature. But it left open the possibility there are materials we could artificially create that would not be subject to that rule. So if I had been paying attention as a graduate student, I could have discovered all of this myself. But I didn't.
Hey, we're graduate students. No, I think it's fascinating. I mean, and I think too, well, we'll get into this in a little bit, but like just how invisible we can get now is really quite remarkable. But before we do that, let me ask a quick question from Joanne here. She says, okay, you said it earlier. What sources of radiation produce radiation without radiating?
Yeah, and that's a great question and a very natural one. So, to give a little bit of background, so our understanding of electromagnetic waves and how they're created is accelerating electric charges produce electromagnetic waves. And that's in Maxwell's equations. And so people just assumed if charges are oscillating, they're going to produce radiation. And then, kind of historically, in the early 1900s, before we had quantum physics, people started to get really bothered by the fact that atoms seem to have these electrons going around in circles and not producing radiation. So they're like, well, wait a minute, those electrons are accelerating, they're going around in circles, why aren't they doing that? And that's where this idea of non-radiating sources came about. A physicist named Paul Ehrenfest said, well, suppose it's not a point particle, suppose it's not a point charge, suppose you have an extended distribution of charge that takes up some volume. You can show that there can be some configurations of that volume of charge where they oscillate together in sync, and somehow the waves that are produced by all of these charges together completely cancel out outside of the distribution.
Okay.
And so they're oscillating charges, but the waves produced don't go anywhere. And that's what we mean by a non-radiating source.
So is it kind of like my income? Like, because it's like money comes in, but then it's canceled out like immediately. It just goes back out again. Is it kind of like, so I make zero net?
That's actually a pretty good description of like destructive interference. Yeah.
Yeah, my
we
money
have an
is
incoming
invisible.
one way and a cancel out the other way.
My income is totally invisible. Sorry, that's a terrible joke, but actually you explained that pretty well, and I'm surprised I was following along because honestly it's late in the day. But so what do we do with these non-radiating sources of radiation?
That's also a very good question, because it turns out that for the better part of a century, people were struggling to figure it out because it was such a weird effect. It goes against everything that people thought they understood about electromagnetic waves.
Like the cat effect.
Yeah. That when you look at the history of physics from like 1910 up to like 2000 or so, you see different authors independently rediscover this non-radiating source effect. And it's almost palpable in their writing that each of them is like, this has to mean something. This is really important, but I don't know what for. And
invisibility cloaks, clearly.
Yeah, and that is to some extent where it leads to is the possibility of invisibility cloaks, or it also has relevance to things like medical imaging, which I could say more about, or we could go on to the next question, depending on your taste.
Okay. Well, we'll give you a break from questions for a minute because it's about 7:24, and it's time for us to so there's different kinds of invisibility. And I had a joke that I was going to do, but my mask kept falling off, that being incognito is not the same thing as being invisible. That hiding something doesn't necessarily make it invisible, it just makes it harder to see. However, this has been going on for a long time, our abilities to hide things. So I decided to make a video about some things that have been disappearing around here. And so this video is loosely related to invisibility. Davey, take it away.
Have you discovered some little black hairs in the bathtub? And you wonder where they came from? Well, it sure didn't come from my head. What could it be? It turns out I'm losing hair from down there. That's right. You, if you are experiencing similarly, may have cooter pattern baldness. That's right. It can be caused by a variety of things, such as alopecia, or, in my case, chemotherapy, and you do get a little patchy in the under region. Now, it just so happens that in the 18th century, they had something for this. That's right. They wore wigs. Yes. Both for your cooter or for your one-eyed trouser snake, they had little tiny wigs that you could wear to replace the hair down there. Now, you might be wondering, what on earth would you need such a thing for? Well, it just so happens that in the 18th century, there was quite a lot of syphilis. And syphilis, well, in addition to patchy hair, you're also going to have lesions and running sores and things that you might not want your sexual partners to know about. So, one way to hide the effects of your syphilis was to wear a tiny little wig. over your nether regions. As you can see, it was just not part of the zeitgeist for them to want to, in fact, stop the spread of syphilis. How about that? Today, we are not suffering from syphilis here in this house. It is, in fact, chemotherapy, and I have decided to forego wearing the wig. But the more you know. And in most cases, it does grow back.
Your native Appalachian accent.
Yes, you can't say cooter without accidentally going into an Appalachian accent. This is hilarious that so many of you actually knew what merkins were. I was like, oh yeah, the peculiars know what merkins. That's what those are called, merkins.
I love that the salesman has a goatee that's shaped into the same shape, almost like he's just wearing one himself.
You know, a little bit.
Yeah.
I did see a quick note. It's Leanne said it. Oh yes, make sure that you are following the top or the live chat instead of the top chat. Some of you get a little bit lost in the chats there somewhere. Let's see. My ex-boyfriend gave me syphilis, not the actual disease. Oh, he gave you giant microbes. That's nice. She said, it must be said that syphilis will forever be my favorite STD. Nice. Good to know. Anyway, invisibility.
Greg, can I sneak a question in? So
yeah.
I was gonna do. I sometimes I do sketches for the different books. I just ran out of time. I really wanted to do a sketch about the cattiness of these physicists writing letters back and forth and rebuttals to each other's research. Are they the cattiest of colleagues? These physicists, because you clearly did a lot of research on their writings back and forth.
Oh yes, this was the ones on the non-radiating source stuff. That one group said that they didn't exist, and the other group said they exist. Yeah, you do find, especially when you go back in years more. I think there's less of it these days, but you do find these just amazingly hilarious catty arguments because. And it's fun to read these sort of arguments where there's this vehement disagreement in print because everybody's trying to keep it professional. But at the same time, they're trying to be as devastating as possible.
My favorite kind, actually.
Yep. Oh, I got a cat visiting.
Oh, speaking of.
Yeah.
So that was a very entertaining part of the book for me. Every time your narrator of the book too did a great job of doing that sort of old gentlemanly voice and the letters.
Yeah, you reminded me of another similar example of that I remember from ages ago is there was a guy named Piazzi Smith who in the 1800s was convinced that the Great Pyramid was this big numerological structure that held all these mathematical numbers and constants of the universe. And a fellow named Wackerbarth, which was an awesome name, came along and just destroyed Piazzi and basically said, yeah, you can get any number you want just by messing around with the dimensions or the units or whatever. And he ended his paper by basically connecting the Great Pyramid to 666, which just made me laugh. So yeah, scientists can get totally rude at times in a very polite, bless your heart way.
I named my cats Darwin and Wallace after Charles Darwin and Alfred Wallace, because of the sort of, frenemy. Explain a bragging to your frenemies. That's what they did. I do have we are almost at the halfway point, so we will have to switch to some music. But I have two questions and then a few follow-up questions. So the first question here: noise canceling headphones cancel out sound. Could invisibility glasses cancel out what we see, or would you call that blindness?
Yeah, well, blindness typically we think of as just not having the ability to sense light. Mm-hmm. But you definitely, and arguably, that's what non-radiating sources are, is their form of, they basically are wave cancellation of the waves that are coming from a source. And so wave interference of light is indeed possible, and we use it all the time in optics for a variety of reasons. And so I don't know if there would be a lot of use for a glasses form of that.
Would the glasses we all wore for the solar eclipse basically count?
Not quite, because they don't use interference. They usually
Hmm.
just use absorption, that the glasses are
Okay.
made of materials that just absorb all the radiation coming through.
Right.
Um, Interference tends to be used, well, actually, if you're wearing any sort of glasses or have a camera, almost all lenses that appear have a anti-glare coating on them.
Sure.
And that anti-glare coating is based on wave interference. That waves
Okay.
bouncing on the outer surface and the inner surface tend to cancel out so that you get less reflection off the surface, which means more light goes to your eyes. So
Okay.
we use wave interference to help us see better.
That's interesting. Now, Sadie has a follow-up to Leanne's question here. Sadie says, following up on Leanne's question, is invisibility most likely to be camouflage, mimicking the surroundings rather than actually being transparent?
Yeah. Yeah. Also, everything's a great question here tonight. I'm not just saying
We
that
got
out
smart
of
people.
reflex.
These are
Yeah.
smart people.
Because one of the lessons I learned from studying all of this is that, yeah, true invisibility is probably not very practical for most applications, because it's so much easier to hide something with camouflage than to
Right.
try to make something look perfectly invisible. And just to give an example, suppose you were wearing you had some sort of shield around you that kind of guided the light around and made you invisible.
Hmm.
But suppose you're now in a rainstorm. Well, now there is a empty region where there's no rain in the middle, which is going to stand out. On the other
Right.
hand, if you're camouflaged as a tree, if it rains out, you now look like a wet tree,
I see.
which,
Yeah.
so a lot of, yeah, so
Much less
invisibility,
opportunity for comedy, however.
yeah, unfortunately, yeah, alas. But yeah, so a lot of it's very challenging to try and think of making something perfectly invisible. And there's a lot of things that could screw it up.
Right. Okay. I like that. Got two other questions, but I'm going to hold off on them for a minute because it is time for our song. And since our front-loaded video featured Cord Ravenswood, How Peculiar in the Field, that's who's bringing our music for you today.
Hey there, peculiars, it's me, Cord Ravenswood, your peculiar in the field, going far and then farther. And I know I may seem like a dashing, fearless human of the world, and I am, but I'm also rather sensitive and quite shy, and, well, sometimes I don't want to see all of the difficult horrors of the world, and other times I kind of want to not be seen myself. Be invisible, as it were. I thought about talking to a therapist about this, but then I decided it might be easier to just take an experimental drug. I got this invisibility formula from some nice scientists that I met under a bridge downtown. Let's see how it works. Ooh. Ugh. Well, while we're waiting for it to take effect, why don't I sing you a song? If I were invisible, I would follow you home every day. And if you took a wrong turn into danger, I'd gently guide you another way. And justice would seem immaculate because you could not identify it, because I would be invisible. Well, if I were invisible, I'd be afraid to get caught in the rain, because the contour of my mass would be noticed by others' brains. And what would be the point of translucent walks if one good splash might force you to talk? What would be the point of being invisible? Ooh. Oh, I'll tell ya, it's hard but true. It's hard to believe anyone invisible when they say they're there for you. So if there are angels, I cannot say, but showing up means showing face. Invisibility is a tempting path, but those you love need to know where you're at. So I will no longer be invisible. Invisible. Well, except maybe at some really big parties. I just don't like crowds. Well, Peculiars, here's what I've learned. I am very grateful to be seen by all of you here at the Peculiar Book Club, so thank you, Brandy. And now, with your permission, I am going to head back out into the world where I'm going to look some of these horrors in the eye and perhaps do something about them. Till next time, Peculiars, take care. As always, I'm Cord Ravenswood, your Peculiar in the field, going far and then farther. Toodaloo!
Yes, so that's Cord. Cord. He travels on our behalf and discovers new things like scientists under bridges and so forth. I have to say we've seen a couple of really interesting points get brought up that now I have to I need to bring back around full circle. One, he did the whole invisible in the rain thing, which I thought was quite funny. Another is that Sadie said invisibility is the ultimate means of non-consensual interaction. And Ryan actually asked that too. He's like, how did you elect to skip the moral and ethical ramifications of invisibility? So we could go there next.
Yeah, that's a fair question. My main answer would be that at the time I was doing the research, we were also, as I said, pretty convinced that perfect invisibility was impossible. So the research that I was directly doing on the subject at the time was more understanding the physics of what is possible, to what extent could things be done. But I was already thinking to myself at that time, there's no way that we're ever going to really get like an invisible man like the movie that you're going to do in the film club.
We hope.
Yeah.
It's funny that you mentioned the rain and Cord mentioned it too. I'm pretty sure that's the solution to every, that's how they saw the Predators. I'm pretty sure that's the solution to every movie, or book that they put an invisible character in it. It usually comes down to, like, in Hollow Man, they turn on the sprinkler system, right?
Yeah, I was going to mention that one. Yep.
Yeah, so that tends to be the solution, right?
Yeah.
The writers will write their way out of it.
That's right. You just splash them, daggone it. Rebecca said, Peculiar Book Club, serious topics. Cat, I will show the internet my butthole.
Yeah, it was much more convenient being interrupted by cats when I was promoting my cat book. Then it was very natural.
That's true. Don't worry, it's very natural.
They
here
fit
too.
in here, yeah.
They do fit in. Okay, so let's see. Where were we? Oh, Kristen Meston said, since invisibility seems to be mostly a material science, how many of the sci-fi stories fell into that category rather than potions or such?
A surprising number, and I'll have to, and I'm not going to remember all the details off the top of my head because there were a huge number of stories. And in fact, it was during the last few months of working on my book that I was originally thinking to myself, well, there are, a number of really famous invisibility stories, and I covered most of those, but I was like, I'm going to go flip through some old science fiction magazines and look for others. And then I was just blown away at how many obscure invisibility stories of every possible variety you could imagine appear. And in my book, I finally included an invisibibliography just to catalog all of the stories that had been written about invisibility that nobody knows about anymore. Mm-hmm. And yeah, they run the gamut from a lot of material science stuff. Some of them are chemical means. Some of them are radiation changing the structure of objects. One of my favorite stories involves an entire invisible planet with invisible beings. And the reason they're all invisible is that there's some rays from the star they're around that gives them a sunburn that makes them invisible.
Oh.
And that's eventually how the heroes escape, is that they're imprisoned, but they manage to get near a window where they get exposed to the rays so they can turn invisible and leave. But
That
yeah, so many
that would make it really
varieties.
hard to, like, put people in prison, I suppose.
Yeah.
You there, one of you there.
Yep. And yeah, so many and so many clever type ways that science
Mhm.
fiction authors came up with invisibility as well. One of my favorites is a story where you use what's called heterodyne mixing. And the idea is that you take a wave that's coming in, you change its frequency to be higher or lower. And so in this story, the idea is that the guy's wearing a suit that takes all the incoming radiation, jacks up its frequency to X-ray level so it goes right through your body, and then changes it back down on the other side so it passes right through you. Um, though it's a very clever idea, but the other thing that's funny about it is that it means that while you're wearing the suit, you're constantly being bombarded by X-rays,
Yeah,
which
not a
means
great thing.
you would get limited use out of the suit.
And out of your body, possibly.
Yeah.
Ryan actually just reminded me, I loved Mystery Men. The guy who's only invisible when no one's watching is really, really funny. Like,
Yeah, I loved the fact in that they took something that seemed to be perfectly useless and showed that it had a use after
right,
all.
yes, that was pretty cool. But I like where he's like, I am Saran Wrap. It's deep and reflective, I thought. Mindy asks, did you find any interesting examples of historical experiments in achieving invisibility that failed spectacularly?
Nothing I can think of in particular that failed spectacularly, because just hasn't been a lot of experiments of this sort. Though I will mention there's one I want to try that's from 1902, and it's a very obscure thing. And it actually goes back to the 1880s, where Lord Rayleigh, a very famous physicist,
Mhm.
he speculated that perfectly transparent objects, that the only reason you can see perfectly transparent objects is because there's different amounts of light hitting it from different sides, so that asymmetry of illumination makes it visible. And Rayleigh speculated, hey, if you were being illuminated uniformly from all directions and perfectly transparent, you would be invisible. And so another physicist named Robert Williams Wood, who was also a science fiction writer, he actually did a little test of this. He said he made two hollow hemispheres. He coated the interior uniformly with fluorescent paint, drilled a little hole so he could peek in, and put like a glass stopper inside, and peeked in the hole to say, can I actually see the stopper or not? And he claimed that he couldn't see it, that it was invisible. And I bought all the parts to do this, but I've just been too lazy to get around to actually testing it
And
myself.
this is why you're not a supervillain, as you point out.
Exactly. It goes back.
That's fascinating. Now, I can't imagine. I mean, there's so many medical things that go catastrophically wrong. Usually people self-experimenting. Like, I remember the guy who put himself on an elimination diet and he ate only cheese and died. I do remember there's a death by cheese story in medical history. But I guess you don't really get that so much with invisibility, because you'd be able to tell if it wasn't working, in theory, you'd be able to tell.
Yeah. Yeah, and most of the techniques of at least trying to achieve invisibility tend to be passive and pretty harmless. They're not using any sort of
Right.
anything particularly toxic or dangerous.
So what's your
Um,
very favorite, most effective? Okay, I guess I'm asking two things. What's your favorite invisibility thing that we can in fact do? What the closest we've gotten, and what do you think is the closest we'll ever get?
Well, I think my favorite that has been roughly tested is this idea of the original 2006 papers that really brought cloaking and invisibility to the mainstream. And these papers were the ones that said, hey, it is possible in principle to construct materials that'll guide light around a central region and send it on its way. And I really love those papers because they completely changed our way of thinking about light and optics and what
Mhm.
materials could do. Um, So that's kind of my favorite example, just because it really changed optics. Practically, what we're probably going to see more than anything will be some rough demonstration of a more active invisibility. An active invisibility is where you have a bunch of cameras and a bunch of projectors all around the object, and the cameras record stuff, the light coming in from one direction and reproject it from the other. And if you do that all the way around, in principle, you can make something that is at least roughly very hard to see.
Because we are artificially bending light around it, I guess, basically.
Yeah, you're kind of taking a movie on every side and projecting it up on the opposite side so that it looks like it's see-through. And people have done, there's like a BMW car commercial, I think, that they did this very crudely. They put a camera on one side of the car and had a projector on the other side. And when it's driving in certain areas, and yes, like the invisible car from Die Another Day, that's exactly like that too. But the car commercial did it very crudely. They had one camera and just, it was very crude, but that's probably, if anybody actually demonstrates something really compelling, that would be it.
Is that so? Sadie has a question that was also Ryan's question, I take it. Is that how David Copperfield made things disappear? Other illusionists, are they using like projectors or?
I'm not actually sure. There's so much. It's always dangerous to try and guess what's going on with illusionists, because illusionists are super clever and they have fooled physicists throughout history.
That's true.
One of my favorite things is there was a time where there were a bunch of physicists trying to figure out a bunch of people who claimed to be invulnerable to fire. Like, these people could go into a burning room and stay there for an hour and come out afterwards. And so there were these physicists writing scientific papers trying to reverse engineer this. Like, how did these people do this? And then Harry Houdini came along years later and said, well, what happens is you set a room on fire, all the heat rises to the top, the guy goes in the room, he lays down on the floor where there's an air hole in the floor, and he chills out there while the steak at the top of the room that he put there for demonstration purposes gets cooked. And so it took an illusionist to just point out, yeah, it's really hard for physicists to try and figure out what illusionists are doing.
Right.
But some of them,
Amberly claims that she can disappear things every day because she has ADHD.
I've never been diagnosed, but I do wonder. I've noticed I have a phenomenon where whatever the thing is that I'm currently looking for is not the thing I will be able to find. However, I will find the 5 previous things that I was looking for. And it always works that way for me.
Davey, Susan said she's going to rewatch my Cooter segment because she could have sworn that was you selling the wigs.
Maybe. Could I be time traveling? You never know.
You could be. It is time now. It is time.
I will say my Facebook Reels algorithm has somehow landed, and YouTube Shorts has landed on a lot of like showing magicians tricks behind the scenes things, and it's always the dumbest. Like, you're like, of course. Like, it's always the simplest trick. Really is the best trick.
Yeah, though it's fair to say that there is a lot of optics in a lot of stage magic, and they do use mirrors and a lot of other stuff, and a lot of that, yeah, you could look at it as very much precursors to sort of the cloaking physics unofficially.
Yeah.
Though I haven't delved into that too much.
I don't have the patience to be an illusionist. I tell everybody everything as it is. But
I will say, I know it is. I saw Penn and Teller live in Vegas, and what I loved about their act is they did the trick, then they explained to you how they did the trick, then they did the trick with like a clear box instead of a cardboard box, and you still couldn't figure out how they did the trick. So it's a wonderful show if anyone gets to see it. Yes, it is time to quiz the author. So, Greg, a tradition on the show, we always have a little quiz for the author at the end. And The quiz is usually some small tangent in your book that I decide to pull that thread and see where it takes me. I could have very easily quizzed you on, invisible superheroes or something like that. But I decided, you had something early on in the book and you were mentioning prisms and you were kind of explaining to us how light refracting through the prisms. And you mentioned one of the most famous images of all time, which is Pink Floyd's album cover to Dark Side of the Moon, which got me thinking, what do the other album covers for Pink Floyd look like? So that's what our quiz is on this week. We are taking a trip to the Dark Side of the Moon and going to quiz you about Pink Floyd album covers. So Get ready here. The Peculiars will help you out. This is a team effort. Right. And remember, Peculiars, get your answers in fast because you could win a signed book for this.
That's right.
So, and I found an amazing article, which we'll talk about in a second, where I got all this information from. So, for Pink Floyd's Wish You Were Here from 1975, the album's artwork is a commentary on the insincerity prevalent in the music industry and depicts a businessman being blank. Is the businessman being A, hit by a car, B, set on fire, or C, smashed with a guitar?
I know the answer. Am I supposed to say it?
Yeah. If you know, this is for you. So yeah.
Okay. It is B, set on fire.
All right. We got. I'm guessing Mindy's answer counts as a B. She gave the fire emoji.
Yep. No, we got one person.
We got a lot of B's here.
A lot of B's in there.
A lot of B's. The answer is yes. Wish You Were Here is a man being set on fire. The amazing story about this.
First B in there.
They did this like 14. This is a stunt man doing this, and they did it like 14 times to him. And on the 15th time, a gust of wind came and blew the fire in his face. And he goes, "I'm done. I am done. No more." He was put out safely. His team jumped on him and put him out. But that was the end of his workday. But the photographer had the shot. They were all set. They had the shot. All right. Question number 2. For this 1977 Pink Floyd album, Roger Waters suggested that they take this figure of speech expressing doubt literally. Is it A, when pigs fly, B, when hell freezes over, or C, when you get blood from a stone?
All right. This one I know the answer. I'll give everybody a chance to throw their answers in. And
they're all up there. There's a lot of them there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to say A, when pigs fly.
Yes, the answer is yes. It is from the Animals album, and I don't have a way of zooming in on this, but if you look between the two smokestacks, there is a pig up there flying. Crazy story about this, they actually flew a pig. What? And that was a live photo of a pig actually between those smokestacks.
Oh my god.
And when the pig got away like twice and actually like interfered with the airport. It had to shut down the airport to retrieve the pig. And so that's the fun story for that album cover. Peculiar's doing great, man. I think I made the quiz a little too easy, or we just got a lot of Pink Floyd fans in the audience tonight.
I think you might have that. I'm gonna have to figure out who got the most answers right soonest. This isn't gonna be easy.
The hard part was figuring out a third one for this, because when pigs fly and when hell freezes over, kind of common phrases. I was like, okay, what's a third one? I was gonna do needle in a haystack, but blood from a stone felt much more rock and roll.
It did.
All right, for Pink, this is your last question. For Pink Floyd's debut album, The Piper at the Gates of Dawn from 1967, photographer Vic Singh captured the iconic kaleidoscope effect thanks to a lens given to him by this legendary British rocker. Is it A, Pete Townsend, B, George Harrison, or C, Mick Jagger?
Oh, I don't know this one. All right, guys.
There we go. Who delivered the
I have a guess, but
I have a guess, and it's an educated guess, because I'm going to guess B, George Harrison. And I can tell you why I guessed that after you tell me the answer.
We've got a lot of B's up here.
A lot of B's. Ryan, Mindy, Amanda, Sharon. Yep, everybody's guessing B. Well, the answer is yes. It was the Beatle himself, George Harrison, who gifted Vic Singh the prism lens that he used to capture the image you can now see, the famous album cover from 1967. So yeah, let me.
Why was it your educated guess? I'm curious.
Well, it turns out this made me feel very smart because I'm actually a huge Pink Floyd fan and have read their biography and know a lot about Pink Floyd. But I also know that when they were recording their first album, the Beatles were recording in the studio with them at the time. I forget. Was it actually Sgt. Pepper's they were recording in '67? It might have been. So they actually met and they actually listened to each other perform. So it seemed like a very natural guess that it would be one of the Beatles that was involved.
So I'll tell you, if you followed, I put the link in the chat. It's from from thisisdig.com. This was fantastic. They did the top 20 Pink Floyd album covers, and each one has a wild story to go along with it. So go check that out. Have some fun.
All right.
Great job, everybody.
This is going to be difficult. So I'm going to go back and figure out who got the most right answers first. And of course, if you're listening on the podcast, the first person to send me an email, that'll be a little bit easier. If I get your email and you have the right answers, then you'll also win a signed book. So
we'll put the link to the email. We'll make sure the link is in the show notes on the podcast there.
Okay. Yes. Cool. Wow.
Oh, man.
That took us in directions I wasn't expecting. And I think I just discovered that everyone here is a Pink Floyd fan. As am I, though I didn't guess the George Harrison part, actually.
I recently got back into vinyl records for no apparent reason, and so I've been snapping up Pink Floyd because, of course. Let's see here.
Yeah, listening to vinyl is great. It's nothing wrong with that. Sadie says so many high school, college laser light shows at the Orlando Planetarium. Sharon says yes, and old. We're old.
Yeah.
We're just well cultured, that's all. Mm-hmm. I'm gonna sneeze again. I had to turn my mic off for that. Woof. Well, that was good. Whew. Okay, so Davey, you're gonna help me figure out who won, and then I will have to announce it later because it's actually gonna take a little bit of digging to figure this out, I think.
Maybe if we ask Greg one more question, I might be able to figure it out.
Okay, we'll ask Greg one more question. All right, there was one that popped up. Where was it? Oh, yes. Have you seen Anish Kapoor's installations? I don't know what those are, but you can tell us about them.
Yes, because we're talking about Anish Kapoor, I believe, is the one who used extremely ultra black paints to make to basically make things that reflect no light whatsoever. This was a big controversy, actually, because he got the exclusive rights to Vanta Black, this sort of patented 99.99% black paint. And it is really freaky because it, you will get we're used to black paint. Like my laptop is black, but I can still see light reflecting off of it. When you look at Vanta Black or one of the ultra blacks, it just looks like a void. And one of Anish Kapoor's installations that was infamous is he had just a hole, a 6 foot deep, 3 foot wide hole that was completely painted with this ultra black, and somebody fell in it because they did not realize it was a hole. They could not tell from looking at it. And I do talk about that in the book because that is another way that at least science fiction authors have imagined invisibility. There's a story by Jack London, among no less, called The Shadow and the Flash, where he imagines two rival scientists. One makes himself perfectly transparent. The other makes himself perfectly black, an ultra black. And then they end up battling to the death at the end.
Of course.
Yeah.
Because you would.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I would not be surprised that Vanta Black is super toxic. These are all based on carbon nanofibers. So they make this paint is just basically a mesh of these nanoscale size fibers that are woven together. And I often describe it like it being a really nasty forest for light to get lost in. It's like Hansel and Gretel going into the woods and getting lost. And that's why it's so effectively black, is that light goes into these fibers and gets sort of trapped, bouncing around in there until it gets absorbed. But yeah, it's a fun subject. And there's one, I have a video of it I shared somewhere at one point, that they painted a watch with like Vanta Black, and they put Vanta Black on a screen behind it. And so when you're looking with the watch with the screen behind it, you see nothing at all. Just can't tell anything is in front of it. It's really cool.
So you can only tell if you look from the side. Okay.
Yeah, look up Vanta Black watch. You'll. At first, I thought it was fake. I had to look at it a long time before I convinced myself it was real.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Sharon Roney said, she said, material science is surprisingly cool, and it really is. So this has been fascinating. And I think, as you can probably tell, this is our gig here. This is the kind of stuff that excites the peculiars. Okay, it's a good, weird science. So we're so glad that you could be with us. I'm so glad all of you guys came. This was so much fun. And it's been really good to get everybody back together for the new season. Davey, do we have a winner?
So we have a tie at the top. Both Ryan and Mindy both. I kind of scored the top answers there, so they each kind of had 6 points each. So Ryan did get a number one answer though. He was the quickest on question number 3. So maybe does that give Ryan the slight edge?
It gives you a little bit of an edge. It's the soonest one. But maybe I can get Mindy a consolation prize. Mindy, would you like a signed copy of one of mine? You can let me know. Oh, she's like, I already have a copy.
I was gonna say, Mindy, I could send you another one too.
There we go. All right, Ryan.
It's Sadie and Ryan. Ryan's going to get it. This is great.
Mindy says, yes, please.
Yes, please.
Yep.
Okay, Mindy. Send me an email. You know what? I'm just going to put it right here.
Yep.
Watch me spell this wrong, Davey.
Yeah.
Jeez.
I do enjoy invisibility is one of those words that seems like it's going to be hard to spell because I had to type it out a bunch for the show. But then you realize it's just all the letter I. So it makes life easier.
Peculiar@bscalace.com. That's what you guys can get in touch with me. Mindy, send me an email and let me know which of my books you'd want me to sign, and I'll send that to you since you have one of our Dr. Sky Skull, as we call you on socials. And you guys can get in touch with us anytime at that address. Actually, that it is manned, maybe not as often as my regular one, but we do read it. So thank you guys so much. This was a wonderful show. This was super cool. Ryan will need to get your address off to Greg, and I'll let you know, Greg, who amongst the podcasters gets in touch. So I'll be waiting for those emails. This was awesome. Thank you guys for being here. What a great night. What a great talk. What a great book. Davey, thank you too. It's been fun. At a place where, if you're weird, you're family.
You got the blue bottle blues when you wake up in the night. Don't make a big mistake, 'cause you can never make it right. When you reach out for the vial, feel the ridges in the glass. It's a matter of survival, baby, better watch your back. There is no antidote